Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Rocket Talk, presented by Ulturism and SkillSteal. It's a podcast where we talk about the South African Rocket League esports scene, some of the stories within it, and some of the highlights from the current week, or just from the game as a whole. I'm Ulturism, joining me is SkillSteal. How are you feeling?
I'm feeling great. How are you feeling?
I'm excited for this. This is a new initiative for us, guys. We want to just take a look and give you guys, if you haven't been around the Rocket League scene for too long, it's just a nice way to catch up with some of the information, get to know some of the players and some of the stories that we have lived for so long. I mean, SkillSteal, you've been around the scene for a long time.
Yeah, I've seen my fair share of South African Rocket League during the years. So yeah, I guess you could consider me a veteran of the Rocket League South African scene.
I mean, it's not even that you've just been around for a long time. You've been a top level performer for a long time. Give us one of your highlights that you are so proud of in the South African scene.
Uh, well, it's sad that it's not around anymore, but the VS LAN from 2019, from last year, I think was one of my highlights. It's always been a dream. It's always been one of those goals I aspired to reach that performance level that you can actually go to a LAN and see what you're made of. That was like my highlight for my Rocket League career, and it's so sad to see that it didn't continue. Um, but yeah, reaching that goal for me, going to a LAN with my team and trying to compete for that top spot, because lands are always the place where you prove yourself. You know, it's the ultimate way to prove where your team ranks up against the other. You can scrim or do online tournaments, but it never has the same level of achievement than a LAN has. So that
It's just
was
there's something about looking across the room and seeing the team that you've just beaten, or like especially the lands that we've been to. It's been like the guys literally sitting opposite you, and I've seen like people
exactly
just making intense eye contact there, and it's incredibly competitive, and it's also just wonderfully camaraderie building, because like
exactly.
getting to actually know the other people around you is just like, hey, I recognize you, and once you've seen the guy's name 700 times, then you're just like, oh, okay, I now know who I'm actually playing against. Lands are one of the
Exactly.
best parts
Yeah.
about
I
any
mean,
game.
you might get tilted when someone demos you too much in game online. Once you meet the guy in real life, you're like, oh, this guy is really cool. He's so chilled. He demos you, and it's like you step back. You're like, oh, that's fine, that's fine. But once you're not able to see that guy, you're like, no, I don't like his play style. I don't like this dude. And you meet him at LAN, and it's a totally different vibe. People are nice. People actually, and I don't think it's they're putting on a front. I really think it's you actually getting to know this person personally. It's like gives this different a level of understanding between the players, which is also pretty nice.
I think that pretty much just sums up the Papa Cape story, because he did that. Like
Exactly.
he revolutionized demos in South Africa, and then like you meet him at LAN, and he's like the biggest teddy bear, such the nicest guy, and you're like, oh, okay, he's actually just having a lol at your expense. So
The Muffin
yeah.
Man.
Well, I'm looking forward to talking about some of the lands just now when we go through some of the tournaments. But we're actually going to start with some of the top performing teams in South Africa. I mean, we've got the likes of someone like XD, who has been unanimously the top team ranked in South Africa, not contested in any of the tournaments. And, there's a couple of teams that have been building their way up. There's a couple of them have been around on the fringes for a while. You were part of a big team recently. And do you want to tell us about your team?
If you referring to Doomsy Boys,
Yeah.
that was a pickup team for ATK's Showdown series, which was kind of out of nowhere, but I think it was really refreshing for the community to have a tournament like that that gave us that VS gaming feel. And the pickup team was consisted of me, Shadow, and Empty Promises. All guys that have been in the scene for a long time. Shadow, a very mechanical player, and Empty Promises, just that all rounder that every team really needs. And we performed better than I expected, if I'm going to be honest. Pickup teams, actually in South Africa, pickup teams consistently do well in teams. We saw the likes of Onlylands with Mother, CPZ, and Pornflex also make it to the semifinals.
Yeah.
And these are all pickup teams, and the rest, obviously, teams that have played together for quite a while. But it's been really interesting seeing pickup teams actually perform well on these tournaments. I don't know if it's honeymoon phase or what the deal is, but yeah, I was part of a pretty strong pickup team recently, but since disbanded, which is where the name pickup team comes from, I guess.
It's interesting to me that like if you look at just that 80K tournament, which is a recent one and one of the biggest ones that South Africa's ever hosted, 2 out of the 4 top teams were pickup teams. I mean, it was you guys and, like you said, Only Lands were high skill players that just came together. And how important, or what do you think the big difference is between a pickup team of people who really do well and then like the other teams who have been playing for a while? I mean, you've got people like TSG Atomic who came in 5th place, and they didn't do as well as a team who just randomly banded together. What do you think separates like a really good team in South Africa from a team that just is trying hard and practicing but not getting the results that they want?
So I think what really helped the South African scene kind of narrow that problem down was six mans. For those who don't know, six mans, it's basically a ranked. You get tier 6 players, 2 random teams, and I really think that helped um, separate, kind of narrow that skill gap down between having a team that has played together for so long and then having a team that hasn't played for so long but has played six mans together. That creates team dynamic that you can really just like a puzzle. You just put it together basically instantly. And that was kind of the deal for Doomsy Boys. Is me and Shadow have played in the past on a team. We kind of know how each other play, but that came from six mans, which was for me, MT and Shadow. We kind of know how each other play by playing in six mans together. So for us, the mechanics and the rotations and the game sense we already had that down. So all we needed to do was click as a team. But if you take a team like TSG Atomic, who are still up and coming players, in my opinion, they have the team dynamics, they know how each other play, but then it's just the consistency, the mechanics, and that just making them take a step back. So it's more not really they don't know how to play with each other. It's more just comes down to the basics, the consistency that separates. And if you take a pickup team, say TSG Atomic was a pickup team, they'd be basically the same level of play, maybe less, because as I said, six mans kind of gives you that general idea of how the players around you play, and that makes you click easier in a team.
I must admit, I think that's something that a lot of people, when they're putting together teams or when they're trying to get better at Rocket League, they're like, oh, I'm stuck in gold. I don't know why. It's always my teammates' fault that we're not doing well. And I think people just, all that they focus on is either someone else's play in their team or mechanics, where guys are like, they're super grinding super hard and they're like, oh, I can get flip resets and I can get ceiling shots and stuff, and I don't understand why I'm not making champ 3, or I'm stuck in plat. Even I've seen guys in plat hitting flip resets and I'm like, what are you doing at this stage? And I think there just seems to be this massive gap between people going, what does it actually take to be a good Rocket League player? And we'll chat about that as well. But it's something I actually want to chat about now that we're talking about what makes the good teams in South Africa, and then we can unpack that for them. Because a lot of people don't seem to get the idea that it takes mechanical skill, being able to hit the shots that you need to at any time. But also, you have to be able to play with the people around you, regardless of how they play or what sort of skill level they're at. You got to understand how they're going to be able to play. Are they going to be able to go up on the wall? Where should I be positioning myself, knowing what their skill level's like? Are they going to be going for that flip reset, solo air dribble onto the backboard, in which case you're not like pre-jumping for the pass? And it's interesting that you say that about the pickup teams, because like you say, is if you're in six mans, if you know roughly what the other guy's skill level's at, you can start predicting what they're doing, even if you don't play with them on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, exactly. So six mans help the community out quite a lot, in terms of being able to make a team easier. I think that's also one of the big things six mans helped with, is creating more teams to enter tournaments. Especially for the lower level guys, there's a lot of them, and six man's kind of brought them all together to be able to make some pickup teams, and some of them stuck. We saw with X Gaming and all those guys, they stuck together, made teams, and they're doing really well actually.
Oh, that's so cool to hear, is that there is actually people who are finding teammates like that. Because, I mean, what is your other alternative? Is just kind of try out random people, whoever's available on the Discord, or find some guys in pubs. I mean, pubs is not a great place to find teammates, I must admit. It's like being someone who solo queues 90% of their games. I'm just like, I don't really find that most of the people I play with, I really want to play more than 2 or 3 games with.
Exactly.
So let's look at some of the top teams in South Africa. I mean, let's chat about XD. XD, like we said in the beginning, is the best team in South Africa. I don't think that there is a single person who can argue against that. And they've had the rotations and the roster swaps and stuff like that. But as an org, they've always been at the top of any tournament that has been run, that especially anyone that has a LAN final. I think they have won every single LAN final that has been in South African Rocket League history.
Well, I am glad you said that because that creates a nice little conversation because I have to disagree with you.
Ooh.
XD has been the most dominant org and team in the Rocket League scene, undoubtedly. But times are changing, Ultrism. We saw it recently with I can't remember what it was. If it was no, it was Momentum. Momentum, their finals. They had that, I think, 2 weeks back. We saw Snowy, I think, was on holiday somewhere, and XD had to play with a sub, which was CPZ. And me and David were casting. We were also having this conversation about, and I brought it up as team dynamic. We saw XD going to Game 7 against NOS, which is also one of the top teams we can speak about, which we can do right now. NOS went up against the most dominant team in SA, undoubtedly, and they went to Game 7, where they almost beat XD, but it all came down to team dynamics. XD had to play with a sub, and I doubt they train and play with a sub frequently.
Yeah.
And a lot of people, and it's kind of this controversial topic in the Rocket League South African scene, where you have a player like Snowy. Snowy is the best player in SA. I don't think you can doubt that.
Yeah.
The most top performing, most consistent. He's always just been there, and he's always just been there for XD as well. You saw the way they played. They had to change the entire offense, the entire defense. You kind of, some teams, and there's a lot of these teams that do this, is they rely on one player to kind of dictate the offense and the defense. You play off
Yeah.
of that play in defense, and you kind of allow him to do what he wants on offense. We saw a play like this on Dignitas back in the day with Astral. Astral was one of these players that could just create awkward situations, get you out of awkward situations. You can just rely on him. And I think that's where Snowy is for XD. He's kind of that pillar that they rely on to get their team there. And we saw that very obviously in the Momentum finals against iEnvy, which is also one of the top teams here, where they just didn't look at that top performing level or comfortable enough to perform at that level, bringing in a sub. And it all comes down to team dynamics. And that's, I kind of have to disagree with. Times are changing in a way that teams are catching up. Not as many teams, but we see the likes of iEnvy, Falasa, Happy Meal, and Wurty. Happy Meal, Wurty, and Falasa, they've all been in the scene for so long, and they are also starting to reach that level where XD can't just sit back and enjoy the ride. You kind of have to sweat out to get these wins. But still, one of the most consistent teams, I think, is still XD. But it's definitely getting very close to not being dominant on top the entire time.
Like as much as you say you're disagreeing with me, I've got to agree with you on that because while XD, like you say, is the top team, it's been amazing to see over the years how the different teams have come up and started to threaten them. So, it used to be a case of XD was at the top, or, even before XD, there was a couple of other teams there was like one team that always dominated the South African scene. Then they've got officially XD, and then XD's run with it as that org. And even with the swaps, there's been like maybe one team that will take 1 or 2 games off them in a best of 7 finals. And it's been like that for years. But weirdly, in the last year at least, like maybe year and a half, there have been about 5 teams that you just actually don't know who's going to go to the finals. Where it used to be, and like that was actually something that discouraged a lot of people from joining tournaments because they were going, oh, it's going to be this team that's going to get to the front, and then maybe like these 2 or 3 teams are going to be able to fight it out for the rest of the prize pool, but that's it. There's not going to be anyone else coming into the top. And now it's been a bit of an interesting thing where you've got other teams like you talk about now. We've got NOS. I mean, NOS is actually made up in the greater scheme of pretty inexperienced players not in terms of the number of hours, but in terms of like the high level play that we've seen. I mean, we've seen people like Mother and Zebra and Pornflakes, and like your fellow teammates Shadow and Empty Promises, and people like that who have constantly been sitting at the top for their entire career. You know, they came in at the beginning, they did really well, and they've been sitting there. But people like Arceon, who's now sitting in the north side, has been sitting at kind of like that second string level the whole time. And now you're seeing so many of those guys that were considered second string for a long time, hitting that GC ranking, hitting the team dynamics that they need to make it into tournaments and actually really threaten guys, even the likes of someone like XD. And that's been fantastic to see the growth of the South African Rocket League team, where instead of having 5 amazing players that dominate the scene, you now have 15 or 20 people coming in that you just actually don't know from the beginning.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, those up and coming players like Arceon and Skulk G Biscuit, actually the entire north side is kind of those bubble players, the kind of like a bubble team. The up and coming players, they've started to move up from that not so great to the actually getting somewhere we can challenge top teams now. But it's not just those in a team; it's those that are not in a team that are still getting in that level, which we
Mm.
consider bubble players. We have the likes of Headshot. Headshot is also in the scene for quite a while. He's been in the scene for quite a while. He's been in a couple of teams back when VS did their thing. Headshot was in there, and he's also one of those players where on a good day he can actually challenge top teams in whichever team he is. And you have OJ. OJ is one of those up and coming players. I don't know. What was it? ATK did a clips of the week type thing where the winner gets 200 Rand or something like that. And OJ submitted a clip which was highly impressive, highly mechanical, which means he's got the skill for that. Um,
Mm.
so all these bubble players, they're kind of breaking into that scene where they can just get a pickup team, as we spoke about. They can get a team and actually compete on the level which they need. Um, so yeah, it's great to see that even these lower level players are finally getting to where they need to be, where they've always aspired to be, which they can actually challenge the likes of NOS, XD, INV, TSG Atomic, all those teams. And scene is growing, and that's great to see.
I'm interested to see how you feel like they're going to actually implement themselves into the top teams in South Africa, because you know it's great to be a GC in your own right, queuing on your own, but breaking into one of these teams, do you try out for them? Do you try and just get a couple of people that you have been playing with through the 6 mans or something like that? Because I mean, if we look at it, XD has been at the top there for a while. They've got Snowy, Mr. Low, Darth. CPZ's played for them a couple of times. CPZ obviously has been running around onto a bunch of different teams. He played in Only Lands in the ATK. You've got so many high level players, but there's actually, 5 or 6 of them that are now floating around that have been those bubble players. And do you feel like it's a good idea as those um, newer bubble players, someone like OJ who is looking to make it into the top levels or the top teams? Do you contact some of the other bubble players, someone like CPZ, someone like Mother or something like that, and chat to them and be like, hey, I want to try out. Let's see if we can just shake things up in the South African Rocket League scene. Or do you think that you try and actually push for a reserve spot / a main core roster spot on someone like iEnvy? I mean, iEnvy came third in this last tournament, and iEnvy's got Phallus and Happy Meal and Wurty. Happy Meal and Wurty as well. Guys who have come up through being bubble players, through being like on second string. I hate using the term second string because it implies that they're not good players or that they weren't able to do stuff, but they just weren't getting the results that they wanted in the VS Championship. So, like, do you try and edge out someone in a top team, a currently established top team? Do you make your own team? Do you just see where someone's looking for someone?
So I think the main thing for these bubble players, and I know back in the day, and I reference VS so much is because that was kind of where the scene found itself
Yeah.
in the Rocket League scene. So back in the day, it was kind of LAN was at the end of the year. Most people couldn't go. A lot of players wouldn't be able to make it. School, work, couldn't get leave, all those sort of things. So people were looking for substitutes, people to play with, and that would happen in scrims. So back in that day, it was easy to kind of, as a bubble player, prove yourself, because people would ask you, "Hey, we're looking for one more. Would you mind scrimming against this team? See how it feels out." And that's actually how it went. And if they felt you were the one, they would actually pick you up for LAN. And after LAN, it maybe stuck, it maybe didn't. But that was how you could kind of cement yourself and get that feeling of, okay, um, this team may be able to pick me up. I can ask for to be a sub, to just play a few games. But lately, with the scene not being able to generate as big as many tournaments, ACGL hosting weekly, we have that. We have ATK. We had ATK, the Showdown series. That actually created a lot more open space. People could just say, "Hey, ATK Showdowns in a few weeks. Maybe make a pickup team. Maybe see how it goes." And many of those teams would then stick afterwards.
Mm.
So I think it's more people just kind of gelling together rather than having to ask, "Hey, you want to create a team?" And I bring that back to six man. Six man's really made these lower level teams, even top teams. You know who you want to pick. You know in what team you want to play, because you kind of already played with them as a random team in six mans. So it's kind of naturally people just, you don't have to generally just say, "Hey, can I try out for your team? I want to be a sub," or "I want to try and make the main roster." I think more people create their own teams than joining like existing ones. We saw a few months actually back, Fifth Dimension, which was consisted of me, Falasa, and Shadow. We eventually disbanded the team, which made three players not be in a team. But
Mm.
then the iEnvy roster was created from Happy Meal Worthy and Falasa. And I don't think that was just, "Hey, we want to make a team, want to join." It was more naturally just floating back. And I think Falasa was in the Salvage Proficiency roster way back in the day, which was Happy Meal Worthy and Yopego. I don't know if he was there yet, but people just kind of like naturally just go back to where they were. Teams just kind of poof out of nowhere, which I think is what helps the scene more. Um,
I
so yeah.
think something that helps the scene and helps those teams gel like that is the relationship between the teams. Just the fact that in the history of the Rocket League scene in South Africa, since day one, it's actually been quite a friendly scene. If you compare it to some of the other big games in South Africa or even just in the world, I mean, there is so much toxicity in online gaming in general. But in the South African scene, it's actually been quite a friendly scene. People just being like, "Hey, I haven't played with you before. Let's jam on six mans. Let's jam, get to know each other on that sort of thing. Scrims, you've heard about this guy or something. They've been recommended to you through someone else, and you join together." And like, I haven't been in the competitive scene for a while. You've got a lot more experience than that on me. Do you feel like it's still the same sort of thing where everyone is just good friends and they are able to jump between teams and they are able to build such good connections between each other, or has it actually turned into a slightly more competitive atmosphere?
I think lately it's kind of balanced out a little bit more. People wanting to compete to be the top, which, if it's in every competitive team spirit, it's in every tournament, every game, it's everywhere. You want to be on top. You want to compete to be the best and the top. But the Rocket League South African community being as smallish, and I say smallish because it's not that small, but it's got small compared to the other ones. We have a community that's not as big. It's really easy to, like, everyone's just nice. Everyone's just friendly. It's easy to get games going. It's easy to actually get the six man's game going. No one's
Mm.
toxic. Everyone's just helping out and coaching in the scene as well. So people helping out each other, helping out the lower level teams, the low level players from the top. So the entire community is actually kind of supporting itself, if I can put it that way. So yeah, community
Fair
is
enough.
pretty nice.
The community is great, like, from that aspect, and it means that, like, it also gives people who are trying to make their way into the scene, they're not well known, they've got skills, they're one of our bubble players that we talk about, but they have come up through. And one of the teams actually that's full of bubble players that have actually proven themselves quite a powerful force recently is Simmering Water Gentlemen. Very, very new team, and that's Chase, that's Zero, and Rangerage. Those three guys 2 years ago were non-existent in the South African scene, and now they're starting to get pretty well known by that. Um, How do you feel about them coming into the forward? Because we didn't see them in the ATK series now, where they didn't actually have a team together. They were all on different teams. It's interesting to see how they're going to come up and shake up this team, because I think they could definitely be a dark horse. So that, like, their name, Simmering Water, is just such a fitting title, because they are simmering players. They're sitting
Exactly.
there really waiting to make something big of themselves.
Yeah, I think that is actually something we can mention. Is you mentioned like this team wasn't something, and now all of a sudden they are starting to actually do something, and they're actually starting to compete. Um, and there's a lot of questions from lower level teams. What does it take to get there? Like, what do
Mm,
I have to do? I'm here. How do I get there? Um, and I think the biggest issue with this is it's time. You
yeah,
Rocket League is such a unique game in the way that you have to train yourself and actually get there. And not a lot of people want to hear it, because who wants to spend so much time on the game? They want to
the
get good
grind, man.
now. They got the grind. No one wants to grind it out. But I think that's what helps Simmering Water gentlemen get where they are now, and that is time. They put in the effort, they put in the training, they put in the grind, and it actually pays off. And it doesn't pay off immediately. As we saw, their results weren't as consistent in ATK as it was in um, Momentum finals. They actually showed up big time, and that was, I think, the first time they can pat themselves on the back and say, "Listen, guys, it's actually starting to all piece together. We're starting to get there." Um,
Yeah.
and time is the biggest factor. You can put in so many hours and so many training drills, and it's not going to happen on day one. Which all these new players flooding in from free to play, which we'll talk about in a second, but all these new players, all these lower level guys asking, how do I get there, how do I get this done? It's time, putting in the effort. That's the biggest thing.
That's why I had to just take a step back. Like, when you got guys who are grinding 4 nights a week for 4 hours every time, they really, you can see the results. I mean, it's such a mechanically intensive game. I mean, in other games like Counter-Strike, you've got to be able to hit your headshots and your flick shots and stuff like that. But in Rocket League, your car is just, it's got to be an extension of your body. If you don't understand how to control your car upside down, you're not going to be able to do the aerials that you need to
Exactly.
compete with these guys. I mean, Inertia, like, they did really well. It was zero in Ranger Rage. They had bread in at that stage. So it was two of the three guys that we see now in Simmering Water. They brought on Chase, who's ridiculous on his own. Inertia did come into that top 5 to 8 seeded. You know, they were on the lines of people like TSG Atomic and Florida Men, who was Eugen Original and Venom. Also a team that's just simmering there under the water. But they've put in the time there. They've got those hours behind them that just, you've got to, you got to be able to understand what shots you need to be able to play. You got to be able to go, okay, these are the team dynamics. This is how we rotate. This is the where we can extend ourselves to. The double commits and stuff like that is the mental game behind it. But the physical mechanics, that's hour after hour. That's sitting in free play for 30 hours every month, kind of just dribbling up the ball on the walls, in the air, whatever. Just making sure you've got it. So that's like you say, to get to GC, what does it take to do that? Is just, you've got to understand both parts of the game. You've got to be
Mm,
able to do the mechanics. You've got to know when to play which shots, but you've also got to be able to do that shot. It doesn't help going like,
exactly.
oh, I need to meet this on the backboard and clear it out, otherwise the guy's going to dunk me. If you can't hit the shot off the backboard 99% of the time, you're going to get dunked on. It's the way
Exactly.
it happens.
Yeah, that's basically each rank. I know a while back, I was speaking to Dated, I think, about this.
Mm,
Is each rank, you can kind of narrow down to percentage values. When you're in gold, you're hitting probably 20% of your shots. When you're in plat, you're hitting probably 40% of your shots. When you're hitting C3 to GC, you're probably hitting 60 to 70% of your shots. And all these top level guys, they're there because they sink every opportunity they get, which
yeah.
is around like 90% of their shots they have to sink. Otherwise, they're probably going to lose. So it's all about getting those opportunities down, and that's what each rank basically teaches you to do. And a lot of people have an issue with being boosted and
Mm.
getting to a higher rank when you're not actually supposed to be there yet. I don't see an issue with that. If you're in a higher rank, you're gonna learn a lot faster. Um, but yeah, that creates some issues for the other people, obviously.
I love that you brought up like the whole boosting topic, because if you think about it, boosting is a double-edged sword. It's just it's something that people use, and they build themselves up, and it's like, yeah, but I'm a champion 2 player, I must be great. And then you're like, yeah, but you're not hitting any of your wall shots. Like, what's going on there? Do you really deserve it? And I love what you say, that a skill shouldn't be there to measure yourself and just like brag to other people. It's like, yeah, I'm champion 2, I can do this. I'm amazing. If you've been pulled up to that by a GC on your team constantly, and all you ever do is queue 3-mans with your team might be carrying you there. But it's not a bad thing. Don't brag about it, but use that as the opportunity, because the only time you learn how to deal with people playing at high levels is by playing with people or against people at high levels, and figuring out, what do they do? What are they doing that I'm not doing?
Exactly.
That's setting them aside like that.
That is one of the biggest like proving points I wanna bring forward with boosting, is if you boost a Diamond 3 into Champ 2, he's probably not going to be able to hold the rank on his own, but he's definitely going to be learning what not to do. And once he drops down to Diamond 3, he's going to think, these guys are actually playing super dumb. Like, why have I been doing this? Because he compares what Champ 2s he played against, what they've been doing, what he wasn't able to stop or save or do with the rank he's in now, and is like, wow, okay, I can actually see now. So yeah, that's one of the biggest things for me. And we mentioned a lot of these tournament platforms, ATK. We've mentioned Momentum as well. Six Mans I've referenced so much. Metal State was in there as well. All these tournaments that we've been hosted after VS. I think most of this was post VS when they dropped Rocket League. Six Mans came in afterwards. Momentum, ATK, all those came in afterwards. And all these guys have actually kind of, in my opinion, helped grow the community so much, especially with ATK. I think we had like 30 something teams enter, which
Yeah,
is, I think,
32.
one of the most alongside ACGL. I think when ACGL did their first week of tournaments, we had like 30 something teams enter. And that's something the community hasn't seen very often. And it's all these lower level teams just jamming together, just saying, okay, let's just have a go at this, have fun. And that's great to see, because most of these teams would probably stick around, and then in a few months time we might be able to say, hey, we saw this team like a few months back doing ACGL, look where they are now. And a
Yeah.
lot of these teams, I think, benefit from these tournament organizers giving them this opportunity. And it's also the publicity as well. I think ATK gave our community a lot of publicity when they did the ATK showdown. I think a lot of players that wasn't in the community before actually noticed and got into the community, made a team, and then started jamming it out, which I think made our community grow a lot.
Oh, it's exactly that. Is unfortunately it's a cyclic thing. Is people aren't going to put in the hours that you need to, that we've been talking about, if there's no point to it. So you've got to have tournaments that are running, that people can join, that people can see that there's a point to it. Prize pool comes into it a lot. ATK at least put in 5,000 Rand for that tournament, and it got a lot of teams to come in. And because, when the winning team is taking home 1,500 Rand for 2 weekends work, each player walking home with 500 bucks. Great stuff, like that's what you're looking for. And it's been so nice. I mean, one of the ones we didn't talk about too much was Raving Mad Gamers. They haven't done a lot of Rocket League like high level tournaments, but they have already hosted a LAN finals. We've had Metal State hosting actual like prize pool based events. We've seen Momentum hosting big tournaments. ACGL is a really nice staging ground almost, where those weekly tournaments allow people to get in there, play consistently. And it's such a nice structure that I think we've got in South Africa for now, where we've got the big tournaments like ATK and Momentum that the guys can play for the big prizes at, because that really sets the guys a upper level where they can go, this is how much time I'm putting in. There is something to work towards. And especially considering we've now got a couple of those different tournament organizers running those sort of things. When VS was running, it was a whole year tournament and then one LAN final at the end. And it meant that like one LAN final determined the entire year's worth of Rocket League, whether it was worth it or not. So when you got Metal State, when you got ATK, when you got Momentum hosting these things, short up here or there by Raving Mad Gamers, you've got regular big tournaments that you can start entering. You've got ACGL in the middle levels where you've got your staging grounds where new teams are starting to try out their skills against some teams. You don't find a lot of the super high level teams going into something like the weekly ACGL tournaments, at least not every single week. So it's certainly a place where they can start finding their feet. And just the balance between them means that there's always Rocket League to play. There's always something to play for. And it gives the players, I think, a chance for them to get in there and try out their teams and see if they really do like the competitive scene.
Exactly, yeah. And for people wondering, Six Mans is still flourishing. It's still going 110%. If people want to join that, 80K, I'm not too sure, but they received it pretty well. I think Ulturism 80K was a huge success. And they're probably going to step in again. I wouldn't be surprised if they do, because there was
I think
30
they are,
something
hey?
teams. Yeah,
I
I
was
mean, they
chatting to
might have.
them after the tournament, and they were very happy with how the tournament went. They were very happy with the support that they got, and it went really well. And some of the people in ATK are quite invested in Rocket League. You know, they personally play the game a lot, and they think that it's great for it's a great spectator sport. Let's be fair. Like
Yeah.
Rocket League is one of the best spectator sports because it doesn't matter whether you know the game or not, whether you're very good at the game or you've never seen it before in your life. You can still understand it, you can still appreciate it, and you can still see the high level plays. And so, you know, I hope I'm not talking out of turn for ATK. I'm certainly not promising anything from ATK's side, but I wouldn't be surprised to see them in the future. You know, they really are looking to build the South African scene across all the esports. And so if we see them pulling out more Rocket League tournaments, it'll be really great to see their support. It'll be great to have them alongside it as part of this real core of South African Rocket League. And I think it's a name that's going to get very well recognized in the South African scene to pull new players in when they're like, oh, ATK is hosting a Rocket League tournament, let's get in there, regardless of whether they've been playing any of the other tournaments or not.
Exactly, and I think that's just the reputation and the name that ATK carries around. I think they're one of the biggest or orgs, or I don't know if you can call them companies. Ultrism. I'm not sure if
Yeah.
they stand for that kind of
Let's call
name.
them tournament organizers is
Tournament
a good
organizers.
place.
There we go. I think they're one of the biggest ones in South Africa. Um, Alongside VS, obviously hosting their VS Masters for CS:GO and Dota and games like that. But I think ATK for Rocket League, I think they're kind of the saving grace, if I can put it that way. And as you said, I wouldn't be surprised if they actually took a shot at hosting more tournaments in the future. So I'm pretty excited to be, just keeping my eyes out on that one, and hopefully they will step in. But recently, big announcement: Rocket League went free to play.
Yeah.
Finally, after so many years of like figuring out why it hasn't already. Um, I think timing, it was great. I think they've already built the player base, the
Yeah.
following, all that, and also the Epic Games buying Psyonix. Um, but recently, free to play, I think that is going to benefit our community so much. I think a lot of players were looking at the game. It's like, I want to try that, but I don't want to pay for it, kind
Yeah.
of deal. And I've been a culprit for that. Looking at games, it's not that much, but I don't really want to pay for it.
There's so many
But
other games that you just like you
exactly,
don't want to have to shell out 300-400 rand for every game that you ever want to try, and then realize you actually preferred your other game already and going back.
exactly. So I think for our community, this game going free to play specifically is going to benefit us so much. It's definitely going to grow the community. I'm still interested to see by how much. Obviously, it's all going to be new players. So they're going to be starting from the bottom, trying to get to the top, and that's fine. As I said, the biggest question lower level players ask is, how do I get to the top? And it's time. It's putting in the effort. So there's a lot of platforms these new players can actually use to not get demotivated. They might be looking at all these top players and saying, "Yo, I don't think I want to put in all that time to get there. It's going to take forever." So I think for Six Mans, if we can, and I've actually seen Six Mans starting to post on Twitter where to get the Discord server, how to join, what to do. I think that's going to help these low level players actually so much, because they don't have
Yeah.
to jump straight in, get wrecked by some smurf in ranked. They can rather just jump into Six Mans, get all these new players. They're all going to be in the same level, and they're going to start jamming out, start enjoying it. And I think that's going to help them out like so much to kind of ease into the community, kind of not get demotivated to keep playing.
Yeah, I'm hoping that that's going to be a very logical progression for the new players. Is, where do you even start? Do you go for the 80K tournament? Probably not. Like that is for the guys who have been playing this for now for 5-6 years. And now that you say, 6 mans, whether you got a team or not, jump in there, play with random people, get better, get to know people, start making your own teams, start going to the ACGL tournaments after that. It's starting to get a very logical progression because, at the beginning, we actually had very few high-level players. If you look at 4 years ago, we had less than 10 GCs in the country. Now you're starting to look at 30, 40 GCs in the country. And so that the player base is getting big enough that the top level is also getting bigger. And so guys are starting to break into that high skill level at the top. And it means now with the free to play, anyone can start, and there is actually a goal to play towards. There is that high level that they can play towards eventually. It's going to take them 2 years to get there, but there's enough of a structure in the middle that they don't have to worry about going straight from like free play to playing against GCs and Smurfs.
Yeah.
And it's something that I'm interested in, is especially with the South African servers. That was a big problem because with the very low player base, it meant that you never queued on South African servers. Maybe if you were sitting at gold, there were enough gold players around that you could get a South African game. But anyone sitting at, say, diamond or higher, I tried the other nights, and I'm sitting at a lowly diamond, but there's nothing. Like I queued for 15 minutes on every one of the servers, and it was like 9 o'clock at night on a Saturday or something like that. And I would be like, that should be one of the prime spots, and there was just nothing. And so I think the fact that it's now free to play, that there's now other places to play, means that guys are actually going to start queuing for the South African scene. And I think it's something that we really need to encourage on every platform, on every social media. I think every player in South Africa should be dedicated towards spreading the word of, guys, queue South Africa, because that's the only way we can, get ourselves more players on it and start finding matches faster, but also just building that community spirit. And especially now with this new patch that seems to have wrecked everyone's ping, that everyone was going from like 180 ping on EU to now 240, 250.
Yep.
It's given people that desperation to go, okay, let's go for that South African service. We fought so hard to get in the first place. I mean, come on.
Yeah. So I mean, that's also something I wanted to touch on, is these local servers probably going to get populated. And in terms of like hopes for the new future, where do you hope, where are you hoping the community kind of like goes from here? Are you hoping that tournament organizers, or in a few months, will probably have stacked platinum, stacked diamond ranks and lobbies? Hopefully, that is something I'm hoping for. How do you think, or what are you hoping for with this free to play Rocket League announcement?
Honestly, yeah, that's the big thing for me, is like the super short term hopes is that we just start populating the Rocket League South Africa servers. Like that is huge, because that is going to make people play. People don't necessarily just want to play on EU. If they can find a South African game, it's going to be more popular. And so then you can get your low level players playing on South African servers. Once you've got people playing, people are going to start getting better. It's just the natural progression that we talk about. The time that you put in directly correlates to your skill. It's basic like that. So as we start getting more people in the future onto the servers, we'll get more good players. The more good players we'll see, the more that the community is going to start growing. They're going to start taking it a little bit more seriously, maybe form a group with their friends, or just try to find someone else who plays the game that they can join in with. And then once they've gotten teams, they can start going into ACGL. ACGL has been running for, I think it's about 2 years now in the South African scene, with these weekly tournaments. To run a tournament every week for two years is a massive undertaking and a massive commitment from them. And 100% props to ACGL. One of my favorite companies in South Africa, bar none. Like they really are fantastic. And so that's what I want to see supported. That's my hopes for the future, is that we're going to have so many teams that there's going to have to be a cutoff for tournaments, because that means that there's so much dedication, there's so much passion behind it. And where there's passion, where there's dedication, you start to get skill. Start to see support. You start to see tournament organizers hosting bigger and bigger tournaments. You see
Mm.
sponsors starting to come in. I mean, sponsors, I think, is going to be the make or break for the South African scene, because
Definitely, definitely.
while tournament organizers are trying to get in these cash pools, they cannot afford to keep floating 10,000 Rand at a time every 6 months to try and keep people motivated. They've got to get some support from the sponsors. And the
Mm.
sponsors are only going to come in if there is a scene to follow it, if there's people
Exactly.
watching the streams and joining in. And even if they're not playing, they're interested enough in the game that they go, all right, let's see what these top guys are doing.
Exactly, yeah, and that's one thing I'm hoping these tournament organizers actually start realizing is when the scene starts to get stacked with all these players, they can't just host these double elimination bracket tournaments. They're going to start having to look at leagues or. And I love this from VS back in the day. I think Alt you was still around. Is they had second like the ladder division, then you had second division, first division, and then premier division. I love that format as new teams played against their equal level skilled new teams. They didn't start playing like against these high level top teams. They actually proved themselves in their own skill rank. They leveled up to the second division there. They played against people a little bit better than them. They dropped down, or they started raking up those W's and started climbing the ranks. And it
Mm-hmm.
actually that promotes the scene so much more in the sense um, all these new players, all these new teams aren't discouraged by saying we're gonna get wrecked next week anyways. You know, like
Mm.
what's the point? Oh, there's this tournament. Oh, but we're gonna get wrecked the first day. You know, we're not gonna make it till next weekend. Like that's gonna that's it plays such a mental game on these new teams and new players that I'm hoping that these tournament organizers start investing more long term in the way that they set up the tournaments. So that is my hopes, and I hope these new players actually stick and they stay, so that in a few months we can actually get some tournaments stacked on a regular basis.
Well, that's the beauty of it. Is, Rocket League was the perfect esport in my opinion. It broke away from the whole just shoot the other guy better than he can shoot you with varying abilities, weapons, blah
Mm,
blah blah, maps. It's really in its own league, if you excuse the pun. And I was reading the other day, and I follow stuff like top esports in the world and stuff like that. Rocket League is now consistently in the top 10. It's
mm,
starting to get more viewers and more players in terms of player numbers and player hours than stuff like Dota. It's really starting to actually compete with the big boys in
mm.
esports. And I don't see it slowing down. I look at the South African Rocket League page and on Facebook, and it's growing by like 5 new members a week. And so, that doesn't sound like a lot, but then you start putting together that we're growing at like 250 people a year, and then it just escalates from that point where the sponsors want to see that. It
Mm.
hasn't slowed down. I mean, it's been out for 5 years and it's still growing even faster. Now that's why they've made it free to play now. Is the guys never expected Rocket League to be this big. I'm pretty sure Psyonix never expected it. And it kind of broke away in the beginning from the fact that it went free to play on PlayStation. It was part of the PlayStation Plus.
Yeah.
That's how I joined it and how I found out. So the fact that the more opportunities you give to players, and then you give them a high skill ceiling, you give them a very well populated game. That's what it takes to make a good esports. And it's also one of those games that you can play 5,000 matches and you'll still enjoy the 5,000th match as much as you enjoyed the first one, regardless of what the skill difference was between the two of them. So it's fun at every level. It's supported at every level. It's got a high skill ceiling. It's got now free to play, which means it's going to be flooded. Sponsors are going to start taking notice of that. And I especially think
Mm.
if there is anyone listening now who is interested in getting into Rocket League, or, a new player or something like that, you have joined at a really good time, because
Definitely.
when the sponsors now come on, if you got 6 months to a year behind you already, you are going to be sitting in a great place to make a break into the competitive scene. And I think too many new players are scared to try a game that's got no future. And Rocket League is definitely not one of those.
Alrighty, so Ultrism, there's a lot of information for new and current players to kind of sink their teeth into. I think this community is growing. I think it is going somewhere where we can actually say we've gotten there, and this community is growing, and I love to see it. A lot of top teams coming up, a lot of bubble teams, bubble players showing their stride, actually getting to where The community likes to see them. And yeah, I'm excited for the future. I'm excited to see where it is going. And yeah, we'll probably see in a few months if we were correct.
Should be interesting to see. I'm excited about it, guys. In the future, make sure to catch up to more Rocket Talk with myself, Ulturism and SkillSteal. We got lots of topics. There's so much in the South African Rocket League scene and in the global scene, in fact, to see where the scene's going, what we're going to be doing. Always keen to have you around. We're going to start getting some guests in here at some stage, which to hear what different people in the scene have thought. And we'd love to see you guys joining in on stuff like the Rocket League 6-mans. If you guys want any information like that on how to get involved in the South African Rocket League scene, how to get teammates, how to start finding out about tournaments, make sure you're starting to join things like the South African Rocket League Facebook page. Start joining stuff like the Discord. It's very populated, it's very welcoming, and it'll be very great to see you in the future. For us, though, guys, it has been a great time talking with each other. SkillSteal, it's been great talking to you and hearing your insight, and we hope to see you guys soon.
Yeah. Cheers.